All right, everyone. Now it's time to talk about mail-in ballot voting and how that could help Biden at 3 a.m. win the 2024 election. I wanted to point out what I have mentioned before, but I wanted it all in one video just to sort of lay it out there about why, while it is possible, it's going to be a lot harder than it was in 2020. First, you have more restricted mail-in voting in a number of the states that were fortified in the 2020 election. That's point number one. You've also got greater oversight. Trump fans are much more primed to watch what's going on, get everything documented, etc., etc. And definitely there should be grassroots efforts, especially in the swing states, to make that happen. Volunteer as a precinct captain, go door to door, harvest the fucking ballots, etc., etc. Make sure that everything's above board. Watch, observe, document, etc., etc. I do think that that's a good idea because there will be shenanigans. I'm not discounting that. The second problem for the TDS sufferers in 2024 is, at least right now, the polling and the incumbency. Joe Biden was not an incumbent when he ran in 2020. He had Senate baggage, he had VP baggage, but he didn't have presidential baggage. He was untested in that role. Now we've got a track record of what Biden does when he is in that office. The voters have soundly rejected those policies. Now, just because someone dislikes Biden and the job he's doing doesn't mean they vote for Trump. Hell, it doesn't even mean that they don't vote for Joe Biden. But the polling is vastly different from the last election. In fact, it's vastly different from 2016, which Trump carried. Trump carried 2016. He came in about 3 points behind Hillary Clinton, was running about 4 behind in the actual final polls. There's a little bit of a differential. In 2020, he was down by double digits for most of the race. At this point in the race, for instance, he was down by about 9 points in 2020. At this point, Donald Trump is ahead. He was literally never ahead at any point in the 2020 election. Not at any point. We have the tale of two effective incumbents. We know how Trump governs, and we know how Biden governs. We now have the ability to directly compare the two, which is again different from how it was in 2020 when we knew how Trump would govern, but Joe Biden was a zero sum. You couldn't say what he was going to do in his presidency. Basically, all he said was what voters had to go on, not what he had done. Now we see this vast differentiation both between what he pledged to do and what he actually did, as well as the falling through of multiple policies. Certainly on the border, that's a big one. Certainly on the economy, that's the biggest one. Foreign policy, you've had a string of failures. Afghanistan, attempted negotiations with Russia and Ukraine, the rising of warmongering rhetoric from China v. Taiwan, North Korea v. South Korea, and the West in general. You've got problems, of course, with Israel and Gaza. You've got a looming crisis potentially between Venezuela and Guyana. If that pops off, that's another foreign policy blunder because the United States has expressed unequivocal support and is flying sorties down there. That may not deter Maduro. In the end, we might end up in a shooting war on our own hemisphere, by the way. So yes, it is possible that ballot printers going brr plus mail-in votes that were freshly inked the day before could tip Joe Biden over the edge. I'm not discounting the possibility. There will be systemic fraud. There will be election fraud in the 2024 election. It's up to us to try to document it and show people, indeed, it did happen. We definitely need people to work as vote counters that can personally attest to any shenanigans that they see, so on and so on down the line. I expect protracted litigation no matter what happens in 24, whether Donald Trump becomes the next Grover Cleveland or whether Joe Biden manages to eke one out despite numerically speaking it not really being possible. I would have to posit that polls that were adjusted upwards for the Dems were instead wrong in the other direction. Because, did you know this, by the way? Polling firms look at the past couple of elections and they adjust their metrics based on the perception of turnout. If I'm using 2020 numbers to adjust perceived turnout, then right now when I'm polling, when I'm basically cherry picking my data, I should come out with Biden further ahead than you would expect reality to be. I should be oversampling Democratic voters. I like how they're setting up, in the New York Times the other day, set it up with a one-off poll, which is probably unreliable, and they're like, well, voters that actually voted in 2020 favor Biden at a higher level than voters that didn't. Voters that didn't support Trump disproportionately. insinuating that likely voters are going to tilt way off into Biden land in the 2024 election. That's also probably predictive programming. They are trying to set things up for a plausibility argument should they be able to hoodwink the voters and rig the election again. But again, it's a lot easier to do that when Trump was admittedly down in the popular vote by a considerable margin. Not by the margin that you saw reported, but by a considerable margin. It's a lot easier when mail-in ballot access because of lockdownerism has been profuse, as opposed to when it's been rescinded somewhat. It's a lot easier when the public's not expecting shenanigans than when they generally perceive there to have been shenanigans. Hell, there are plenty of Democratic Party voters that believe the 2020 election was falsified. They just don't care. They got their wish. And so they're like, well, yeah, republic-breaking and democracy-destroying maneuver was performed. But it's justified in the end. You've literally seen a number of talking head so-called influencers effectively echo the same sentiment. It's justified, because Orange Man bad. They realize what happened, they just don't even care about it. Independent voters, by the way, a significant minority of them believe the same thing. Right now, you've also got Donald Trump being persecuted. I have no reason to believe, based on his surge post-indictment gate in both general election and primary polling, that if he's running under house arrest from the Mar-a-Lago, it'll be nothing more than a Napoleon moment. Basically, Napoleon in exile, fomenting his return. That would probably be the best possible moniker for it, should that happen. And that's not an unlikely scenario. Of course, the courts could punt it further and say, well, we're going to wait until after the election, because if the people speak and they want Donald Trump, we don't want things to get messy. That, by the way, would actually be bad for Trump. It would invigorate the liberal voters because they would think that Orange Man bad, oh my God, his rigged court system is defending him. They're trying to bring the dictator back, and we're terrified that there might be fewer wars and that we'll get tax relief and the inflation rate will begin to drop lower. We're terrified of we don't want to win. It's almost like there's a cult of being afraid of winning going on or something like that right now. It's kind of strange how people think. Again, unless you don't pump your own gas, you can't possibly think Bidenomics is better than the economy was under Trump, except maybe during the core lockdown period. Basically, the shitty economy that happened then, briefly, having been partially reabsorbed, is closer to what we've seen under Bidenomics. It's stagnation, etc. And the economy and the border are the two biggest things on people's minds right now. The liberal side of politics keeps trying to inject abortion and side issues. The only thing I can say about that is that the GOP stupidly takes the bait and decides to go off into la-la land on those issues. I don't discount that. Trump doesn't, but you certainly see the DeSantis Republicans doing the hardliner thing, trying to come out of right field and clobber Orange Man. It doesn't seem to be working too well, actually, when you think about it. So, yeah. It's possible that mail-in vote rigging could tip Biden over the edge in some of the swing states. It's just that the margin is so much different now, you'd need so much more effort to pull it off, and therefore you have more potential for failure and being discovered in so doing, that I think it's actually not that likely that they would prevail, honestly. That's about all. Peace out.